and thank you for joining me. I'm Brian Sussman. Despite the poster in the background, I only have one thing to say on climate today, and that has to do with Kamala Harris, who has actually said that the reason why so many people are rushing our border is because of climate change. I'm going to tell you something about Kamala Harris today based on my many years of broadcast experience in San Francisco observing her. This goes back to the 90s. And of course, in episode 248 and 249, I talked about her time as district attorney in San Francisco. She was a woke district attorney long before George Soros started placing such people in big cities across America. Now, you've heard the polls, which interestingly have been deleted from the internet regarding her liberalness. She's whacked. The most liberal senator in the Senate. I contend that she's more radical than AOC and the squad. So episodes 248, 249 detail a lot of what she did in San Francisco, including not prosecuting a cop killer with first-degree murder. She prosecuted him and convicted him as a second-degree murderer, which did not make him eligible for the death penalty. He killed a police officer. This was a kid in San Francisco who pulled an AK-47 on two cops. This is a kid in San Francisco who'd been in and out of the youth authority and detention centers. He's a bad kid, 20 years old, pulls an AK-47, kills a police officer. She wouldn't prosecute to the full extent of the law. Why? Likely because of the killer's minority status. There was another situation that I talked about in the last episode. This involved a phone call to my radio show in San Francisco from a wife and mother who was beside herself, hysterical, because her husband and two of her kids had been murdered by a guy, and one of her sons watched the whole thing. They were shot down in cold blood after their car had been stopped by an MS-13 gang member who was in San Francisco illegally, had committed many other crimes, but was never deported. He kills this family in cold blood. Again, she wouldn't prosecute it as a first-degree murder. It was a second-degree murder. He got life in prison as opposed to death. This is the real Kamala Harris. Now, after she was district attorney in California, she became, in San Francisco, I should say, she became the attorney general of the state of California. And I'm going back to some old show notes here for my radio program because you need to hear this. And you need to share this with friends who are voting for this woman for Lord knows what kind of reason. She is not fit to be president of the United States of America, let alone, in my opinion, a public servant of any kind. This is a woman who has referred to ICE agents as being like the KKK. Oh, yes, she's against the death penalty. She's for sanctuary cities. She's referred to immigration and custom enforcement officials as being like the KKK. I'll explain in just a moment. But she was elected to as the California Attorney General in 2011. So fast forward to the year 2015. She's doing an interview with the CBS television station in Los Angeles. And here's what she said. Now, they're going to try expunge this from the internet. That's why I'm sharing this. They'll never mention this during her campaign. That's why I'm sharing this. She said, an undocumented immigrant is not a criminal. That's a quote. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal. She said, I know what a criminal looks like, one who's committing a crime. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal. Despite the fact, do you know what the law is on this? This is the current federal law. Illegally crossing the southern border, coming across the border, not through a checkpoint, without a passport, just coming across the border, is a federal misdemeanor punishable by up to 6 months in prison for a first offense and a felony on subsequent violations. She doesn't believe that. She doesn't believe in the rule of law, the laws that are currently on the books. And by the way, if you remember, she ran for president the last time around. 2019, she declared her run for president, and it was a disaster. I don't know how the Democrats think she's going to do any better this time. They'll have to lie in order to make her look more appealing. She's not an appealing candidate. Quite frankly, in my opinion, because of her liberality, she's not an appealing person. But she was one of the candidates during one of these debates. She was asked if she supported decriminalizing illegal crossings. She raised her hand. She also raised her hand if she would give free, when asked if she would give free health care to illegal aliens. She said she would. During that same period, she put out a tweet. My guess is you probably can't find this on X either. Let's be clear. Private prisons are making money off the incarceration and suffering of human beings. One of my first acts of business as president will be to begin phasing out our detention centers and private prisons. Now, this is an Antifa talking point. This is a Black Lives Matter talking point. They do not like the private prisons. There are 130 private prisons in the United States of America. The reason why we have these private facilities is because they're run incredibly efficiently, and as a result, it saves the taxpayer money. They have to abide by all the rules and regulations of any federal institution or state institution, but the bottom line is they're run very effectively. 130 such institutions in the United States. If we were to close them down, that would mean thousands and thousands of prisoners would be set free. She wants to give a get out of jail free pass to people who have broken the laws and have been prosecuted and now are paying their debt to society. She wants to set them free. This is a BLM Antifa talking point, and it's been articulated on many an occasion by Kamala Harris. This is also 2019. Donald Trump's president. Do you remember we had the Occupy ICE gatherings throughout the country, disrupting and detention centers and deportation operations? And the chant was, abolish ICE, abolish ICE. Washington State, there is an ICE detention facility. One of these Antifa activists, his name was Willem Van Spronsen, decided he would take matters into his own hands. Again, he's Antifa, takes matters into his own hands. Armed with an AR-15, he decides, I'm going to go in and I'm going to set free the captives. So what do you think happened? You go into a facility armed, you start making threats, you're going to get shot. You're going to get killed. And that's exactly what happened to this guy. It's rather interesting because just after he was killed, there was a search of his house, and they found a manifesto whereby he wanted to abolish ICE, break down the institutionalized private prisons, set the captives free, Antifa member. And 1 week after this went down, suddenly, this guy became a folk hero among the radicals. He deserved to die based upon his actions. But he became a folk hero. And that's when Kamala Harris put out the tweet that said, let's be clear. Her patent line, let's be clear. Private prisons are making money off the incarceration and suffering of human beings. One of my first acts of business as president will be begin phasing out detention centers and private prisons. You see, she was fanning the flames of the mobs in 2019, where there was this violence occurring in the name of Antifa, in the name of BLM, to shut down ICE and shut down the detention centers. Harris, during a Senate confirmation hearing for Trump's ICE nominee, here's what Harris said. Again, I don't know if you can find this on the record any longer, but I'm just telling you. She said certain communities saw ICE as comparable to the Ku Klux Klan. She's comparing, likening law-abiding law enforcement officers of ICE as being like the KKK for administering its power in a way that is causing fear and intimidation. Well, generally speaking, that's what law enforcement can do. They can intimidate and cause fear and intimidation if you're violating the law or threatening to, particularly among immigrants and specifically among immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America. And once she was VP, so this was her as the Attorney General of California, first the DA of San Francisco, then Attorney General, then Senator of California. Once she became VP, she went on the down low with this kind of rhetoric and instead brought forth the cackle. I'm telling you, the reason why she always laughs is it's covering the contents of her heart. It's just like when you catch somebody in a lie. You bust a friend in a lie, something that didn't happen that they say happened. And oftentimes the response will be, oh, well, you'll cover it up with a lie, with a laugh. That's what I believe Kamala Harris is doing half the time with this laugh. She doesn't want you to know what she's really thinking because she is really very radical. And once she was on the VP and went on the down low, here's what she actually said. I wish I would have had this in my book, Climate Cult, because it speaks volumes. She literally has blamed the mad rush to our border, which wasn't occurring during the Trump years. It's occurring during the Biden years because why? Because all of these people know, game on, come on in. They're bringing out a welcome mat for us. You can come in, you can start getting freebies. Life is good. She blamed the mad rush on the border on climate change. She says it's getting incredibly hot throughout much of the world and people are coming to America. Let me give you one more story from her days as Attorney General. This story may ring a bell with you. When I had my radio show in San Francisco, this was a big one because I believe this is her real legacy in California while Attorney General. There is a wonderful pedestrian pier in San Francisco, right along what we call the Embarcadero. It's right by the baseball park. It was just a couple blocks from my house in San Francisco. Just a really nice part of the city where there isn't a lot of crime. And there's a pedestrian pier, and it was a beautiful day. And there was a family that decided to, do a day in San Francisco and enjoy the great weather and go on the pedestrian pier. There's this guy who looked to be homeless sitting on one of the benches on the pier. This guy had been involved in criminal acts in San Francisco on many an occasion and should have been deported at least 5 times. But instead, San Francisco is a sanctuary city. So these illegal immigrants, including ones who have carried out various crimes in the United States, know that they can come there and be handled with kid gloves. This guy's name was Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez. He should have been deported on numerous occasions by San Francisco Sheriff Ross Mercarimi, but Mercarimi is just like Kamala Harris and like all the other progressives. They're not going to do that. So what happens? Somehow, and the story's murky to this day, but somehow Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez has a gun and he's sitting on the pier, and for some reason, he decides to shoot a member of that family visiting San Francisco to enjoy a day in the city out on that pedestrian pier. He shoots her. He kills her. Her name, remember this one? Kate Steinle. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General. She didn't say a word about this. She didn't reprimand the sheriff for not deporting this guy numerous times when he had the opportunity to, because Kamala Harris supports sanctuary city policies that run throughout the state of California and in parts of the United States that have literally freed thousands of illegal aliens, allowing them to commit countless crimes, murder police officers, and kill absolutely innocent civilians. You know, there's a saying that you oftentimes hear, say their name, say their name. Well, I will say some names. These are the police officers in California that were killed by illegal aliens. Danny Oliver, Michael Davis, Ronald Singh, Marilyn Ferris was an innocent civilian, as was Kate Steinle. And I mentioned some other names previously in episodes 248 and 249. But despite all of that, Katherine Harris was elected in 2017 to represent the crazy liberal state of California, the place of my birth. You know, it just you always want to love the place where you were born. But my love affair with California ended some years ago. It's just the nuttiest, kookiest place. She becomes the senator from California, and as U.S. Senator in 2018, Harris urged the Senate Appropriations Committee to reduce funding for beds in the federal immigration system. In other words, beds? Who needs beds? Set them free. She rejected calls to hire more border agents because she doesn't think there should be any border agents. And she wanted to reduce funding for immigration enforcement operations. You know, the left's trying to deny that she was the border czar, but they can run, but they can't hide. She was the border czar. And she did exactly what she thought she should do regarding the border. Nothing. Because I think if you would drill down into her ideology, she would be one who believes there should be no borders. It's like George Soros, open borders. She doesn't believe there should be any borders. She doesn't believe that anybody is illegal. For minorities, she always prefers a get out of jail card free, as opposed to looking at the facts and the circumstances and prosecuting accordingly. This woman is radical. She can smile, she can cackle, she can get the entire mainstream media behind her, She can run, but she can't hide from the record. So that's why I'm using my voice as just one guy who had a radio show in San Francisco for 20 years as an opportunity to make sure we get the word out regarding who this woman really is. And I just want to encourage you to share with your friends. There are a lot of people still on the fence about this election. Maybe it's because they don't like Trump's personality. Maybe it's because they've never voted Republican before. Or maybe it's just because they're lazy. They don't want to vote, period. We have a privilege in this country of being able to vote. Now, I realize the left has taken advantage of our system to put in place laws and regulations and statutes that make it easy for them or easier for them to manipulate the vote. That's why they can always say there was no voter fraud. That's because they've institutionalized the fraud. But nonetheless, in this election, we need to vote and we need to get out the vote and encourage people to vote. And if you know a Christian person, an evangelical person, Donald Trump talked about them at a speech rally a couple days ago. They oftentimes don't vote. They need to vote. And they need to vote on the Republican side of the ticket. Why? Because the Democrat side of the ticket, or I should say the ballot, does not align with those biblical values. You can see it in Kamala Harris's first campaign ad. What does she talk about? The very first campaign ad, reproductive rights. That's abortion. She right away talked about illegal immigration. Of course, she's all for it. Welfare for all. That's communism. And free health care for all, which we can't afford. But these are their top items. Nothing about getting the economy going again, nothing about national security, nothing about election integrity, nothing about reduced government spending, nothing about critical infrastructure like dams and reservoirs. I was just on a podcast prior to this as a guest, or a news program prior to this as a guest, and they were asking me about, well, we're having all these water shortages around the country. What's the problem? Is it climate change? I said, no, it's not climate change. It's gross mismanagement by the government. The government has a few responsibilities. One, to keep us safe, national security. Another is providing critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure includes dams and reservoirs. But what does the government tell us? Instead of saying we need more dams and reservoirs, they tell us, damn you, quit using so much water. We've only built one new dam and reservoir in the last 40 years. The population has increased so much in 40 years. And we've only built one new dam and reservoir, and that's in northern Colorado, in the last 40 years. In the meantime, we've torn down, at the behest of radical environmentalists, we've torn down dozens of dams and let the water out of dozens of reservoirs. And in the meantime, you got big cities like Phoenix, growing cities like Phoenix and the Los Angeles basin that are running out of water because their primary source of water is Lake Mead, which is attached to the Hoover Dam. And Lake Mead is running out of water. Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam were created in the 1930s in response to droughts that we had in the 1920s and the 1930s. It was completed in 1935. It was to make sure the people had water. We need to get this mindset back again. But the environmentalists are so determined to make sure there is never another dam or reservoir built. So then you would say, well, how about desalinization? Well, desalinization would be great. It can be done. We do it in San Diego. We do it in Tampa Bay, Florida. It can be done. It's expensive, but isn't your water worth it? You can only live a few days without water. But the environmentalists don't want to disturb the natural habitat. Natural habitat in the sea adapts very easily. But beyond that, they'll also tell you, well, it's also very expensive and uses a lot of energy. Well, so do your electric cars. They use a lot of energy as well. In fact, if you have an electric car and you start plugging it into your house, you'll notice that your electricity bill for one car driven 1,000 miles a month, that one car is going to increase your electricity bill, depending on where you live, by at least 50%. But they don't have a problem with that. And Kamala Harris is all in on this climate agenda because she knows that agenda has nothing to do with climate and everything about controlling you and me. Thank you for joining me in this live episode of the Brian Sussman Show podcast on Rumble. We also have it available on YouTube, and I hope that you will share, like, and subscribe. Thank you so much. I do appreciate your many years of listenership, and it's my privilege to be able to speak to you via these podcasts. God bless you, my friends. We're live each Monday, Wednesday, Friday, about 9 a.m. Pacific. You can also follow me on Twitter, Debate Me Al Gore. Again, God bless you. Have a great rest of your day.